Welcome to the Arabesque Sewing Studio. Now I have a really fun project to share with you today. We are going to be making the Mini Macaroon Pouch by Zakka Workshop. Now as you can probably see, this is modelled on the actual French dessert that we love because it is so decadent. And if you choose fruity fabric shades or chocolate kind of shades, we can make something that looks good enough to eat. Now this is a completely hand-sewn project and it takes a bit of patience, but I've got some really cool little techniques to share that is going to speed it all up and make it far less fiddly to sew. So what can you store in your Mini Macaroon pouch? Well, quite a range of items. You can put sewing related notions like thimbles, you can put a needle rest or stitch markers or a thread bobbin. You can also put little treats in here so that the inside is just as sweet as the outside. Now in Australia we know this as a macaron, and a macaroon is quite a separate dessert made with coconut. So depending on where you are in the world, this might be a macaroon or a macaron, and you can let me know in the comments below what you know this as where you live. I'm going to do my best today to call this a macaroon like it is in the pattern. Now if you love videos that demystify tricky techniques and give you the confidence to try them yourself, I'd love you to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. Now to get started, we're going to construct the basic macaroon pouch, and then if you'd like to change things up a little bit, I'm going to take you through how to add this cute piping accent that looks exactly like the pastry. Now you can purchase the pattern and the kits to make this from zakkaworkshop.com or from various stockists around the world. So let's grab some supplies and we'll get started. Okay, to get started, you're going to need a copy of the Mini Macaroon Pouch from Zakka Workshop. And you're also going to need 2 macaroon discs and a 6-inch zipper. And you can get all of this in kits from Zakka Workshop or from some of their stockists around the world. You're also going to need some basic sewing supplies, so scissors, a marking pen for tracing the templates out. I've got a needle here. I've got 2 different weights of thread here, so I've got some nice strong heavier weight thread here, and I've got some bottom line thread here which is really fine and also strong, but will actually help hide the stitches as we are sewing the fabric and zip together. I've got a sew line glue pen here, and I've also got a fine line glue tip here which is some PVA basting glue, which is just holds things a little bit stronger when you need a little bit of extra hold here. Now in this tutorial I'll also be showing you how to add the really cute piping edge that I've got here. And so I've got some size 0 piping cord here and a length of bias that I have cut from fabric, and this is 7/8 of an inch wide. So you can totally skip that if you would like to leave that off your project, but obviously it does add a really cute little extra element that really makes this look like an actual piece of pastry. Now my secret weapon for sewing this is I have made myself an extra cardboard form that is just out of corrugated cardboard, and so I've made that by tracing around the disc, and I've done 2 layers of corrugated box cardboard, cut them out, stuck them together, and then just taped around the edges so there's no rough edges here. And what I'll be using this for is an extra support while I'm sewing the disc and the zip together, and this is a complete game changer. You'll find that this gives you something to support your work and just is like an extra pair of hands really, so that this is much easier to construct. Now the fabric that I'm using today is some poppy cotton, and this collection is called My Favorite Things, and so you can see that this is just perfect for this little project, because you can fussy cut the little images out and feature any one of these gorgeous little pictures on the side of your pouch. So if you're not sure how to cut this out nice and centrally, the way that I've done this is I've taken the template for the outer circle, I've folded it into quarters, and then just pick whatever image that you would like to cut out, and I just sort of eyeball the middle with my finger. So just poke my fingernail in the middle there, about where I think the middle center of the image is, and then just place that inner corner of the template right there where you think the middle is, and then without moving it, you're just going to open it out, and then you can just fold it back and have a look on all edges, and you can get a pretty good idea when you're happy with where it is as to whether you've got it central. So then you'll just be able to trace around it, and you shouldn't have to waste any fabric by not getting it in the center. So you're going to need 2 cuts of fabric for your exterior. You're also going to need 2 cuts of fleece. You're going to need 2 cuts of lining, cut from the lining template, and you're also going to need some interfacing. So I like to actually use 2 different weights of interfacing here. So I've got a fusible woven interfacing here, so this is SF101, and I've also got a slightly heavier interfacing here, so this is a non-woven, and this one is craft fuse. So the reason I like to do that is we're going to be gathering this around the edge of the interfacing here, and to get a nice crisp edge, it's helpful just to have a little bit of an extra ridge there to help that all to go around nice and centrally, nice and smoothly, so you haven't got any puckers in it. So something to bear in mind with this pattern is that this is a really tiny project. You really can't fit very much inside. You're not going to get a lot of depth inside, but you do have a little bit of leeway over this. So depending on how deep you sew your zipper into this, you can make your pouch a little bit taller with a little bit more room inside, just depending on the seam allowance that you use for your zipper. So I've sewn this one with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but you'll be able to see as I'm making this that you can actually sew this with a smaller seam allowance, and this will give you a wider amount of zip showing in the center, and then you'll be able to fit something slightly larger inside if that's what you would like. So now we're going to get on with the exterior construction. So grab your 2 circles that have your fleece fused to them, and grab your needle and your strong thread. So I recommend cutting a double length of thread here. So I'm doing probably about 1/2 meter here of thread, and double threading your needle. Then just grab either one of these circles, and I'm going to start about 1/4 inch, maybe just a little fraction less, in from here, and I'm going to take quite small stitches. I'm just going to do a running stitch. Now as we come up to where we started, I'm going to stop reasonably close and come out on the top. So I'm on the right side of the fabric, and you're going to take your disc form and place that on the wrong side of the fabric so that the cup is facing up. Then you're going to start pulling on those threads to pull this and tighten this around this button form. Now you might not get it in the center, and so what you're wanting to do is just loosen it a little bit and move it around until you're happy that you've got this pretty central. Now I'm pulling on this pretty tight, but not super tight. And I'm going to tie this off. Now I'm going to cut myself a second piece of thread. So then I'm going to go back through the pleats that are already here and just pick them up again. You can go right on top of the thread that you've already sewed. So I find doing this extra row of gathering just really helps with the final product of getting your fabric really nice and tightly. Now this is where you do need to be a little bit careful, because these little aluminium discs are not very strong. So if you pull too hard, you can actually warp this. So we're wanting to be pulling quite tightly, but you're not wanting to warp it. And what you're aiming for here is when you turn this over, you're not wanting to see any large pleats around the edge, the outside edge of this. So you want to be pulling nice and tight, getting that as snug as you can. And then I'm going to take, because this is quite hard to tie a knot, you're going to just take a few extra stitches back through what you've got here. Just make sure that that's going to stay nice and tightly and it's not going to come undone. So now we're going to repeat the process with the second disc and the second exterior. So now we're going to move on to getting the zipper ready. And the first step that I like to do for this is to mark the stitching line that we're going to use to attach this to the exterior. So this is where you can determine how deep you would like your zipper to finish up. So if you would like a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, then you're just going to rule a line 1/4 inch away from the edge of the zipper tape. And if you would like a deeper pouch, then you can just move that line down out towards the edge of that zipper tape, and you can go, probably you don't want to go any wider than about 1/8 inch, so that you've still got enough to work with as you're stitching this in. So I like to go probably a little bit in between this. So I'll be going about 1/4 inch here away from the edge, and on the right side of the zipper I'm just going to mark a line down the edge of the tape, and then just flip it around and do that the same thing for the other side. And this just really helps when you're trying to get all these edges nice and straight. This just really helps you get that seam allowance nice and even. We're going to flip this so that the wrong side is facing up. I'm going to rule a line about 1/8 inch away from the end of the zipper stop here. So just do your best to get that straight. And then on this side, I'm going to open the zip a little bit, and I'm going to mark a line about 1/8 inch away from the top of the zipper stop here. So this is just another little aid that helps you when you're coming to stitch. Just means that you don't have to think about where your needle's going. So now I'm just going to take one strand of my heavier thread here. You're going to take your zipper and you're going to place it right sides together, and we're going to stitch across the ends of the zipper tape, so stitch them together, and we're going to follow the line that we've marked on each side. So you might find it a little bit easier to open your zip a little bit, just so you haven't got quite such a bump to get through there. So just align the ends of your zipper tape there, come in from the back, so on that mark that we've done on the back there, and come up through that top line and back down. So then you can just keep flipping at both sides and check that you're staying on that line. So I'm going to do just a few stitches on top of itself here. And then I'm going to stitch my way along. So when you've reached the end of the zipper tape, without cutting your thread, we're going to start neatening up and tidying away the seam allowance of the zipper tape here. So you want to open this out, then you're going to tuck in
a little corner here at right angles and fold that down and open, so you've got a little triangular shape of zipper tape here, and then just turn that around until you're pinching it comfortably. So then we're going to just tuck our way along this section, so down the side here, just tuck these two edges together. And then we're going to stitch this little triangular side just with some little tiny stitches. So when you arrive back to where you have started from again, you're just going to take a few stitches here and either knot your thread or just cut it off. Okay, so now we're going to repeat this for the other two sides of the seam allowance. Okay, so now we've finished sewing this together and we've neatened up the seam allowance of the zipper tape, so you can turn this right side out now. So we've got a nicely joined zipper in a circle, ready to add on to the exterior. So now you're going to grab a length of heavier weight thread and we're going to run a gathering stitch between the stitching line that we've drawn on the zipper tape here and the edge of the zipper tape. So you're just going to come in and go in and out along the edge of the zipper tape. So you take stitches about 1/4 of an inch long. Doesn't really matter where you start on the zipper tape. And it is a little bit trickier as you go over the join. It's a little bit thicker there, so it won't gather quite so easily there. So we're just stitching a running stitch along here, which is just going in and out. Now when you get back to where you started, you're just going to pull on this just a little bit, just to pull it all in just a fraction. And then keeping this thread long and loose, we're going to grab this cardboard form that we've made and we're going to slip this inside the zip. So this is on the wrong side of the zip now. And what we're going to want to do is line the edge of this cardboard with the edge of the stitching line that we've ruled. So wherever you've ruled your stitching line, you're going to line that edge up with the top edge of the cardboard, and then I'm just going to grab a pin and I'm going to poke that into the side. Doesn't want to go in. Find another spot. There we go. Poke that in, and I'm going to work my way around and doing the best that I can. I'm going to align the stitching line with the top edge of the cardboard. So sometimes it's going to be easy to poke it in, other times it's a bit harder, just depends on which part of the cardboard you're sticking it into. So I'm doing this, say, about 3/4 of an inch apart. Have a wheel of pins holding this in position, and if you think you need to readjust any of it, just lift it and move it around until you think that that is pretty straight. So then I'm going to get this gathering thread and I'm going to tug on this and pull it tight. Not super tight, just enough to give this all a bit of a pull in. Now you'll see that this little section here where the zipper tape is joining. This is quite a lot thicker, and that's not going to want to pull in so easily, and that's okay. The main idea here is that you're going to have most of this tucking in really nicely. You can just take a few extra stitches into the zipper tape here and just secure it to keep these gathers tight. So just take a few stitches into that, and then you can trim that off.
Okay, so now we've got the zipper nicely pinned around the cardboard form that we've made. We're going to take one of the sides of the exterior and we're going to place that onto the zipper. So this is where you get to decide how you want to orient the fussy cut that you've done in relation to the location of the zipper pull. So if you want this facing this way when the macaroon pouch is closed, and you can make sure that it's facing this way. If you want it closed like this, you can turn it that way. So really, I don't think there's any right or wrong way of doing this. Just something to be aware of if you've got a particular look that you'd like to keep in mind here. You can do it that way. So I think I'm going to do mine so that it's when it's closed, it's basically at right angles to the teacup. So what I'm going to do is I've got a knot tied in the end of my thread here. I'm going to bring this in underneath the zipper, so up inside where I've got this cardboard form, and I'm going to come out right on my stitching line that I've marked here. I'm going to pull that fairly tight, and then I'm going to take the exterior and place that on top and center that as best as I can. So this is where it starts to get really fiddly, and you need a fair bit of patience just to make sure that you're not getting everything all tangled up. We're going to be exiting from the zipper tape, going inside the very edge of the little disc here, taking a little bite of fabric, so probably not even 1/4 of an inch I'm going to be taking, pulling that through, and then going back down as directly straight above, so trying to keep this as straight as possible, back down into the zipper tape and taking an equal bite of zipper tape as fabric, and I'm going to go right along that stitching line. So just check each time you take a stitch that this is not caught around any of the pins that you've got. And pull that tight. Now you're not going to be able to pull it tight straight away, so just don't worry about that. We're going to keep these stitches loose. It doesn't actually matter if they're not all the same width, but what you're aiming at is you're always trying to keep them vertical from each other, one above the other. Now you can open up the zipper and get this, just bring that through inside. It gives you a bit more access to what's inside, and then you can just fold this back and tie this off. Okay, so there we have one side sewn in, and that wasn't so hard, was it? So now I'm going to run a gathering thread around on the other side of this tape, just the way we did on the first side, and I'll meet you back here when I'm done. So now we're ready to attach the second side, and the great news is that the second side is much easier to attach than the first side was. So I'm going to be putting my cardboard support inside of here again, and what I'm wanting is for the top edge of the cardboard to align with my stitching line on this side like we did on the first one. And you might find that depending on the thickness of your zipper seam allowance that you've got here, that this is not going to sit nicely up at this level without sort of collapsing down inside the zipper tape. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of extra padding in here, and I've just got some folded fleece here, so if you want you can go ahead and make a second one of these cardboard supports, but I'm just going to use some scrap bits of fleece and just put enough layers in here so that when I'm pushing down with the cardboard forming here, that it's going to be sitting at just the right level, so that when I tighten these gathering threads, that stitching line is sitting right at the top edge of that cardboard support. So I'm just going to pull these tight, a couple of little stitches, and I'm ready to start stitching this other side on. So just pay attention to, if you've got a fussy cut on this side, to the orientation of the fussy cut on the other side. So this might not be important to you, but if you want it to end up facing a certain direction, you don't want to stitch beautifully all the way around and get around and realize it wasn't the way around that you wanted. So we're going to come up inside the pouch here, so just open your zipper a little bit and pull those teeth apart, because you don't want to snag your thread on that. So you want to be coming up, just pick a spot inside and come up on your stitching line. And you can close your zipper again. And then just center this over that, and you can press nicely and firmly on that. And I'm just going to be going, I think it's easier to go with it facing me this way, so the zipper's underneath and the little disc is on top. So you're going to take a little bite of fabric directly above where the thread is coming out. On the first one, and then going back down directly in the fabric, in the zipper tape, sorry, directly underneath, taking a little piece of that, and then just keep stitching your way around. Come up in that zipper tape again, right where you started, and then back into the fabric. And now I'm going to open the zipper again, make sure I don't snag my thread in that. Now open it all up, take everything out. And then I can tie a knot all that off nicely. So now we're ready to add the lining circles into the little pouch, and you can either do this by running a gathering thread around the seam allowance of this and drawing those gathers in, but my favourite way, just to speed this all up, is to glue baste this in place. So I'm just going to cut this down, this seam allowance down by a little bit, and run some glue just inside that interfacing edge, and then just work your way around and push that down
And tuck that all in place. And then just turn it over and just have a look at whether you've got any straight bits or puckers showing there, and just readjust any of this just by sliding the fabric around in the seam allowance with your fingers before the glue fully sets. So that's looking pretty good. So now you can just pop your lining circles inside the pouch, and you've got a couple of options here for attaching this. Now you can actually glue base this. If you are kind of done with sewing your little pouch and you've had enough of all the fiddliness, you can just run some glue, and this is where I would use this PVA basting glue and my fine line glue tip. Just do some dots of glue around the edge of this and slip that in. I'm going to keep my lining facing this way because I've got this directional print. So you can pop that in there, and then you can just take some pins and hold that in place while the glue is setting. Just pin through the zipper tape and the exterior of the fabric, and just place some pins around. And this is the way I actually attach this, whether I glue it or not. This helps hold this all in place. So if you're going to be glue basting it, I would just leave it like this to let the glue dry, and you can even add a few extra pins in if you're noticing that it's not all staying down. If you're going to be stitching it, then the next step that we do after you've pinned this in place is to fold the zipper tape back. So roll it back on itself so that this is all sitting up like this. Then you can make sure that you push your pins down nice and firmly into all of those layers. And then you can just grab your needle and thread. So now I'm back round at the beginning where I started. Just going to knot the thread off. So thread that back down through. Then come up and give that knot a bit of a tug and trim it off. So now we're going to move on to adding some piping trim into your macaroon pouch. So we're going to start by making the piping. You're going to need to cut a piece of fabric on the bias at about 14 inches long, and I've cut this at 7/8 inches wide. So I'm just going to trim off the mitered ends on this, and then I'm going to actually glue baste my piping inside of here. So just with my glue stick, I'm going to run some glue down one edge here, running the cord down the middle of the fabric. You're going to roll this over and line up those raw edges. So now this is the only part that we're actually going to sew on the sewing machine on this project. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch as close as I can to the edge of this piping. So now you're going to take your piping and cut it into two 7-inch lengths. Then you're going to grab your seam ripper and we're going to rip out about 1 inch of stitching from one end of the piping. Then you're going to open that up and cut off about 1 inch of cord here. I'm not being super exact here. So just trim off any loose stitches that you've got and grab your glue, and we're going to fold in a seam allowance to the wrong side up to where the stitching is starting here. So just put a dab of glue on each side there and push that down, and what you're wanting to do is get this matching, so tuck all this in so that the edges of your seams are lining up as best as you can. So now we've got a length of piping and we have an open end, and there's about ½ an inch here that doesn't have any piping cord in it. And what we're going to be doing is wrapping this around the disc and fitting this until we get this nice and snug, and then we can tuck this end inside. So just grab one of your covered discs, and what we're wanting to do is get this piping to fit exactly on the edge of the disc here without any gaps or lumps or bumps. So we want it to be quite snug, which means you actually are going to be stretching it a little bit. Grab some pins, and we're actually going to pin right through the edge of the disc here. So just grab enough fabric here that you can push your pin through, and then come up through the edge of the piping and push your pin through just enough so that you can put your fingers between it and you're not going to spike yourself. So then I'm going to just work my way around, pushing a pin through into that piping, and I'm just stretching this piping just a little bit. So just reach your fingers in between those pins. Now when you get back around to where they're going to be joining, you're going to get your ends as close as you can. We've actually got too much to fit inside, so don't try and fit it just yet. We're going to lie the open side out first, and I'm going to overlap this. And I can see that I can trim off a little bit of extra here. So for me, this is going to be probably about 3/8 of an inch that I'm going to trim off here on the end that is not folded under. So I'm just going to cut that off. Then I'm going to undo some of these pins and open this out. I'm going to join this into a ring. So I'm going to be tucking the side that still has the piping right up to the end inside the open end that we've got here, and overlapping that and making that as snug as I can. And you're going to put a dab of glue on each side of that, and a little bit on the other side. Give that a good pinch, and then we can go back and repin this. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be sewing this with all these pins sticking out the top of it. So we're just going to slide this apart. So this is still all connected. So slide it down just enough so you've got a nice gap between what you've done here. And now we're going to go and just dab some glue inside that piping. So just take your time here to go in between all of these pins. and then slide that piping back up. And now we're going to slide the pins up. And you can push this down onto the bench, onto your desk, and start removing the pins. And then just press it for a little while until you are happy that it's stuck. So now I've got my zipper gathered up, and I've got my cardboard form inside. So you're just going to place the exterior onto the edge of this. And to get started, I'm going to start by coming up inside the piping here, and I'm going to come up inside the stitching line here, so closer to the actual piping cord, not on the other side. So within that, then I'm going to bring my needle up and making sure that I'm still inside that, so I can roll this edge down enough just to see inside it. I'm going to come up, make sure that my knot is right up there, and then I'm going to come up directly above where my thread is coming out and take a little bite of the edge of the exterior fabric. And I'm going to bring this back down directly underneath, inside that. Make sure I'm coming back down inside my stitching line on the piping here, and bring that through. Now I'm ready to start attaching my zip. Directly where you've got this coming out, now you're going to take a little bite of zipper tape right on that stitching line that we've marked. Then I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to come up directly inside that zipper tape on the edge of that. And take a little bit of macaroon, a little bit of fabric, and back down inside. So now I'm all done. I've got the lining in this, and this little pouch is finished. So I hope you found this tutorial useful and that you feel confident to go ahead and make one of these. I'd love to know if you've got plans to make one.